G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and you all knew that this particular video would be coming down the pipeline probably. I didn't know if I would actually record anything talking about this. Because I frankly agree with Games Workshop's move here. And that's going to come as a shock to many of you. But, well, let's just delve into it. I've been talking for quite a while about the logistics issues and the bloat that is occurring across multiple game systems, and how I felt that the bloat was unsustainable, especially for certain factions that have grown incredibly in scope and have many units which do the same thing, making other versions of those units essentially redundant. You know, Primaris Marines, for example, embody this whole concept. There are usually 3 units in every category that do the same thing as one another, and it makes you ask, why these different kits, why these different units? There should be one unit. And frankly, Age of Sigmar has the same problem, with obviously Stormcast Eternals being sort of the worst example of that. And even going back to Age of Sigmar 2nd edition, I felt that the shoehorning of the warbands from Warhammer Underworlds into the game was a detriment, and made even worse by obviously the Warcry warbands being shoehorned in, because these add a ton of bloat to the game, which makes it fundamentally hard to balance, but it's also a lot more stock that has to be kept in production or kept on hand. And frankly, the only people to blame for this are Games Workshop, because their whole strategy of endlessly releasing new products is coming back to bite them in the bum, because they can't keep up with the logistics of the situation for a whole host of reasons, which we've sort of spoken about in the past. And now we get to wear the consequences of that. And unfortunately for Games Workshop, it's annoyed a great many people. I think they've made the right decision, but it's not a decision that should have been made in the first place. We have a company here, for better or worse, and you may hate this part of the video, that's fine, leave your dislike and keep walking. But at the end of the day, the company relies on FOMO. That is their big selling point. They go, here you go, here's a nice enough looking miniature, we're going to sell this to you, it's limited time only, hype, buy it, and then, we don't have enough stock of it, and just as we get enough stock of it in, hey, guess what? Here's another new thing for you to go and order. And that's just constantly what they've been doing for a few years now. And this means endless releases, but also people in the background going, well, you need to keep it supported, keep it in production, because, I play that army, or I keep that army, I collect that army, whatever it might be. And you can only do that for so long before the mechanisms begin to break down. Because if you haven't expanded your production capacity in line with the output, eventually you can't keep up, and everything ends up out of stock on your website. So, do you support it all? And that's the physical product. Then you have obviously the written product in the background, the rules writing that goes along with it. So if you've added all of these warbands and all these special little snowflake characters out of Warhammer Underworlds in, who each have their own little special rules written for them, what do you think that does to, one, the playability of the faction, because now you've added all this extra bookkeeping, but also you now have to add all these extra rules in to suit that one little characterful unit. And cool as that may be, narratively, you're sacrificing something on the gameplay spectrum. And of course it makes the job of writing it all much more difficult, because now you've got all these extra units which have to be put in and balanced somehow, and yet they contain a whole plethora of unit models, which essentially are just models farmed out of other units. You've just combined them all together. And how does that work for balancing purposes? It's usually not done well. And that's been a problem, like I say, going back to the Age of Sigmar version 2 days. And here we are going into version 4. So, as we look down, obviously, we get a whole host of kits. And Warcry is going to be the biggest offender here for sort of the non-Sigmarines. But let's go through the Sigmarines here. So you can see a whole bunch of stuff is going out. I mean, Liberators are going out, but they get a new model. So, what did you expect? With a slightly less Art Deco and more Man in the Iron Mask vibe to it. Hooray. Really glad we got more Sigmarines. Imagine if they didn't do a Sigmarine release every 3 months. Age of Sigmar would be so boring. But look at this. All of these models are going to be removed from that range, from the Stormcast Eternals, and yet it is still going to feel like a full range. There are more models shown here being removed from the range than two different factions combined in some cases, like let's think Fire Slayers and maybe Caradon Overlords or the Adonis Deepkin. Those entire ranges combined barely equals what's being removed from the Stormcast range. And much of what we see in the Stormcast range are miniatures from things like Underworlds, or all these constant limited characters that pop up, like Primaris Lieutenants, the Errant Quester, and Gavriel Shoreheart. I don't care. Dumb names. World of Warcraft characters. And we get that constantly throughout this bloody range. Of course they're going to get rid of them. Skaven. They're releasing new Skaven miniatures. So all these old ones, what ones they do decide to keep in production, they're just going to move them across to Warhammer Fantasy Battles. And they'll say, buy them over there on square bases. It's just a great way for them to get rid of basically two birds with one stone. Same thing with the Savage Orcs. They're like Wurgog Prophet. That's Wurzag. Wurzag, the Great Green Prophet. I imagine that the Savage Uruk boys and the Boar boys and the Weird Knob, since all these, except for Hedraka's Mad Mob, which is one of those Underworld's warbands, again, always popping up. Apart from that one, these are all old world, old fantasy miniatures they just put on round bases. So they're going to go back to being on square bases. So they're not really gone, they're just gone from the Age of Sigmar game. And that's going to annoy some people who've bought into the game and had invested into these miniatures for playing this game. Yeah, that sucks. That sucks, but you have to understand now, what they're doing to you, for better or worse, they already did it to Warhammer Fantasy Battles. And when they did it to Warhammer Fantasy Battles, they killed everything, and it was overnight, in favour of a completely different game system. Your game system is still going to exist, and you've got at least 5 minutes of warning before it happens here. Old Warhammer Fantasy Battles did not get that. So keep that in the back of your mind. And of course for Chaos, well, it's all of these Warcry warbands, and also the Underworld stuff. Yeah, I am not shocked by this development. And this will not be the only Age of Sigmar purge. That is a prediction I'm going to put out there now. More stuff will go. Just like with the Last Chance to Buy, as Forge World was being reorganised in the wake of Alan Bly's passing, I think something similar will happen with Age of Sigmar. Just one by one, a few inconvenient, inconspicuous kits will just slowly vanish away. That just seems to be the way it goes. Beasts of Chaos, I think much like with the Savage Orcs, this is just going to go over to Warhammer Fantasy Battles. Especially because they're going to be a main faction over in Warhammer Fantasy Battles. They've been looked after in the last few months of Age of Sigmar, version 3. I think they got a book release. I didn't really pay much attention to it, didn't matter to me one iota. Here we go, a handful of other miniatures going off sale. Well. Apart from the Sila Anfingrim, which has never been anyone's favourite model, and the Mistweaver Sai, which is a bizarre choice to get rid of because it's not an old miniature. But all the rest of those, yep, those are old Warhammer Fantasy Battles characters, so guess where they're headed. Yep, they might re-sculpt them as well, to reuse them over there. I'm not sure what the plans are. But that's technically where they belong. The Sylvaneth Branch Wraith, hey, I don't know what they're going to bring in for the Wood Elves. They're going to be one of the main factions in the old world. So maybe in 3 years' time when they do the Wood Elves expansion, they'll have a new plastic Branch Wraith model over there or something. The Saurus, on the other hand, being a Legacies unit, I don't know if he'll even make it across because they're the unsupported factions. Very interesting to see how any of that turns out. The Big Bus on Gigantic Spider, I think that'll make it across just fine. But we'll see. They'll head over to the Last Chance to Buy section of the Warhammer.com store. The one thing that I'll say about the last chance to buy is Games Workshop does a terrible job of managing it, because they always put 150 items on there simultaneously, and people genuinely want to buy them. And if you gave them 3, 4, 5 months notice, they would start going through and buying quite a lot of the miniatures. The problem is they give you 5 minutes notice because they put them all up at the same time and they don't stay around for long. So it's either you have the money to invest straight away or you can get stuffed. And because they've got terrible inventory tracking and management over there, well, they'll say something's in stock, it's out of stock, and then you won't find out until a few weeks later and you get an email that says, like, actually, sorry, that's out of stock, or unless you email them, as many viewers have reported, because their stock does not talk to their computer systems. Wow, what a great way to run a billion-dollar company. But I agree with the decision on principle that you need to downsize the Age of Sigmar range, especially the Stormcast Eternals, because it's just bloated to the extreme. And then you can go from here to the Primaris Marines and chop away about half of that range, and I'll start to become a pretty cheerful chap. But of course, the players get upset by this, and I'm sympathetic to a degree. I'm sympathetic in that, yep, it sucks to have your heart ripped out of your chest. Well, get used to it. I know it's horrible to say. I've been advocating on behalf of Warhammer players for a decade now, talking about these issues, back from the Galaxy in Flames blog days through to the start of the Outer Circle on YouTube, when we had the old grey static heavy metal style intro opening and a microphone worse than this one, and the original What Broke the Fans style videos, were just ranted in the old days about how bad they'd screwed over Chaos Space Marines, lessons which they objectively still have not learned from. With 10 years of me, basically howling into the wind. And I get it better than most. But this is a good thing. I know you don't want to hear it, but it's a good thing. Because at least if they get rid of a whole bunch of this crap, they might actually be able to keep some of the other stuff in stock. And hopefully, all of the double ups units, where it's 2 different units that do the exact same job, start to vanish. And you can simplify your game system and actually do that whole streamlining thing. The only addendum that needs to be made to this topic is that I don't trust Games Workshop not to just continue the bloat, to fix up their production issues in the short term, and then because they can't get away from that hyper addictive FOMO model they've got going on, where it just brings them in money and makes those profits look great every quarter, because they can't get themselves away from that, they're probably going to bloat all of the system again, and then 5 to 10 years time they have to do another culling. It's the way it goes, unfortunately. And you can hate what I'm putting out in this video, but you can't really sit there and tell me I'm wrong. I mean, we have the receipts, don't we? We've seen this all play out in real time, and we've seen it play out multiple times in the last few years. We saw how they treated the old world and let it die because it was an inconvenience to them. And now Age of Sigmar is an inconvenience to them as well. Not that they're letting it die, but more the case of they don't want to support everything. They bought it all out. They deliberately bloated it. It's a problem of their own creating. They realise that they've got a problem on their hands, so they've bitten the bullet. They're willing to take the fans being upset at them to try and resolve the situation in the short term, but I feel no sympathy for them because it's a situation that the company has created. And I can't feel too sorry for the fans of it because you're the ones who bought everything. You played into it. You paid for every FOMO purchase. You paid into the hype. I'm sympathetic to you in the regards of, hey, when I love something and I want it badly too, I know how motivating it can be to want something. But, it's a bitter pill to swallow for you. I get it. But I can't be overly sympathetic at the same time because you got to read the writing on the wall at times. That's why I can't sit there and critique every single bad thing that they do. I want to talk about the good things. It doesn't work out that way. Anyway, that's it for these guys. One other thing, I have updated the spreadsheet more. So now, when I put in the unit values, we've got more adjustable points formulas where it scales up exponentially as we go along, because obviously having a lot of wounds, 1 extra wound, 5 points, 10 extra wounds, 140 points, sort of thing. Same thing with the weapons. Rather than list every weapon individually, I've categorized them based on basically performance in the game, and anything that has a similar performance goes together for creating the points levels. So if I had, say, a Dreadnought, I can actually spit out some correct, quote-unquote, Contempt of Dreadnought stats now. Look at me go. And I can also give it some weapons, like a Gravis Power Fist, a Gravis Las Cannon, and a Melter Gun. And look at that, it put all the points in there and actually spits out a number that is kind of acceptable for the performance of Contempt of Dreadnought in Heresy 2.0. So I would call that the system working as intended. So I'm pretty happy with how this little chart's going on, and that's had about 3 hours of work put into it now. So that's it. This is what as little as 3 hours of work can bring you if you're designing something like this. And there, of course, this is not the only calculator like this to exist. I'm just trying to create one to try and backwards balance Heresy 2.0. Like I said, when it's done, I'm going to throw it there free for all of you to use. I don't expect to finish it anytime soon. Like many of my games projects on the side, they go on in the background because real life always takes precedence. Speaking of which, I am leaving at the end of this week for 3 weeks. I have my long-belated honeymoon. We booked to go to Japan for our honeymoon back in 2019. We booked it to go in 2020. And guess what happened the week we were leaving? The lockdowns began. And where I live, we had the longest lockdown on the planet. It was great. So we missed out on that opportunity, and then as COVID was coming to a close, we booked a cruise. So I'll be heading out to over to New Zealand, to Hobbiton, for a couple of days. I'll be over in New Zealand, the Bay of Isles, and then up to Tahiti, and then across to Hawaii. I don't holiday, so this is an experience for me. So I'll be in Hawaii sort of the very, very end of April, the tail end of April. I'll be in Hawaii for a couple of days. So if you're in Pearl Harbor at that time, you might run into me, for better or worse. But this is a very long belated honeymoon. But that does mean there's going to be a bit of a pause on content going up. I'll try and get a few videos made to go up while I'm away. But obviously new releases or any big news that happens, there's just going to be nothing from me, I'm afraid, during that time span. But I will try and get a few things up there. The biggest ones being I've got a review coming up for a Kickstarter for War Scenery. That'll come out this week. And then you won't hear anything from me, apart from maybe a couple of videos I'm able to quickly edit together and get up here. That'll be scheduled. And for better or worse, if there's an issue with them or anything, unfortunately, I won't be there to test it out. So I'm going to be relying on Kat to look after that in the background for me. But yeah, I'll be back start of May. Anyway, that's it for me. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Hope you understand what's going on with everything. Thank you all for watching this episode, and I'll catch you on the next one.